Hello, and thank you so much for checking out the second episode of Hot on the Case, and big, huge thank you for all the love for episode 1. This podcast is something I'm so excited about, something I've already put so much love and care into. I can't wait to watch it grow and hopefully improve with every single episode. But the fact that you guys are here for the beginning of it all, you're reviewing the show, you're rating the show, leaving comments, even posting it on your story is unbelievable. And I'm so thankful. And hopefully you guys will all be here next year and beyond. This week's case is very controversial, and I wouldn't be surprised if your opinions and theories are completely split. This is also a pretty well-known case, especially if you're familiar with true crime. I also covered this case on TikTok back in August, but we're going to go so much deeper into this case, far deeper than we could ever go in a 10-minute long TikTok video. And by the end, hopefully together, we will uncover the most likely answer. Was Kathleen Peterson's death a tragic accident, a cold-blooded murder, or possibly even committed by an owl? It'll be up to you to decide if you think that Kathleen Peterson's husband, Michael, is the world's most unlucky man, or a cold-blooded killer who got away with not one murder, but 2. My name's Breanna, and I'm hot on the case. It began with a 911 call, December 9th, 2001, around 2:40 a.m. 58-year-old Michael Peterson calls 911 to report that his wife, 48-year-old Kathleen Peterson, had fallen down the stairs. She was unconscious, but still breathing, and he begged for the police to arrive as soon as possible.
911, where's your emergency?
1810 Cedar Street, please.
What's wrong?
My wife had an accident. She's still breathing.
What kind of accident?
She's down the stairs. She's still breathing. Please come.
Is she conscious?
What?
Is she conscious?
No, she's not conscious.
Okay. How many stairs did you fall down?
Huh?
How many stairs?
Stairs.
How many stairs? Calm down, sir. Calm down.
No, 15, 20, I don't know. Please, get somebody here right away, please.
Okay, somebody's dispatching the ambulance while I ask you questions.
It's in Forest Hills, okay? Please.
Okay, sir, somebody else is dispatching the ambulance. Okay, is she awake now? Hello? Hello?
Michael would then call 911 again a few moments later to update the operator that his wife was no longer breathing.
911, where's your emergency?
Where are they? It's 1810 Cedar. She's not breathing. Please, would you hurry up?
Sir, calm down. They're on the way. Can you tell me for sure she's not breathing? Sir? Hello?
It's important to note with both of these 911 calls, Michael himself is the one to hang up both calls, which is typically seen as odd when you have a loved one in an emergency situation when it's life or death. You know, that 911 operator on the other line of the phone is your lifeline. It's the only thing stopping you from getting your loved one the help that they need. It's the only thing connecting you to getting your loved one to safety. So it's really odd and really rare for a loved one to be the one to actually hang up the phone. It's not unheard of, it's just seen as odd. And something else odd about Michael Peterson's set of 911 calls is that he doesn't mention blood. Not once. And blood was the first thing that the first responding paramedics noticed when they walked into the Petersons' mansion. Blood everywhere. 48-year-old Kathleen Peterson was tragically already dead by the time the paramedics arrived. She was lying on her back, sprawled out at the bottom of her staircase. Only her head and shoulders still resting on the bottom set of stairs, and then her lower body was slipped out of the staircase a bit and sprawled out on the floor below the stairs. There are photos online that show how Kathleen's body was found, and if I do include any photos, they will be strongly censored due to the graphic nature. This was a brutal scene. Blood had pooled all around Kathleen. Blood splatters covered the stairs, the walls, all the way up to the ceiling. There were 10,000 individual blood splatters surrounding Kathleen's body, and it took hours and hours to clean the mess. This looked more like a scene out of the Saw horror franchise than any fall down the stairs I have personally ever seen. Kathleen had at least 7, but possibly up to 10 deep lacerations to the back of her head. She had wounds on her arms and her hands that were consistent with defensive wounds, ones that you would get if you were trying to fight off an attacker, possibly. Kathleen also had cartilage to her neck that was fractured, that was consistent with a strangulation. It really doesn't take a seasoned detective to come to the conclusion that this looked like a murder. And since Kathleen's husband Michael was the only person in the house at the time, it doesn't take an FBI agent to conclude that he is guilty. It doesn't seem tricky, right? It doesn't seem like this case would be one of the most controversial and puzzling cases in recent history, but it is. This case began with a 911 call, but that's also how Kathleen's life ended. And to understand the complexity of her death, first you must understand her life. Kathleen Peterson was born Kathleen Hunt on February 21st, 1953. Kathleen was always smart, the top of her class, the most likely to succeed type. And something I found really cool about Kathleen is that she was the first ever woman to be accepted into the School of Engineering at Duke University. She would go on to get a bachelor's and a master's degree in engineering, and then have many high-profile positions at a variety of successful companies. And at the time of her death, she was actually the VP for a tech company called Nortel Networks. But Kathleen wasn't all work all the time. She was a lover of art and dance. She was very popular in her community, very well liked and respected. Kathleen married her first husband, Fred Atwater, in 1977, and they would have one daughter together named Caitlin. The two would divorce in 1985, and then 1 year later, Kathleen would meet a single father whose 2 daughters were really close friends with her daughter, and that man was no other than Michael Peterson. And the second that Michael and Kathleen met, there was an instant connection. In 1987, they would move in together, simultaneously blending their families, which was a seamless change. Michael had 2 biological sons and 2 adopted daughters who, again, were really close friends with Kathleen's one daughter. So it was like a sleepover every single night. Everyone got along. Michael and Kathleen would officially marry in 1996. It was both of their second marriages, but it really felt like a fairy tale. Michael was a war veteran and a successful author. Kathleen had a successful career of her own. The blended family lived in Durham, North Carolina in a gorgeous 14-bedroom, 9,000 square foot mansion. The Petersons were popular, happy, successful, soulmates, wealthy, and envied by everyone they knew. It was the perfect life for a perfect couple until that 911 call. The injuries to Kathleen's head were very unique, very odd, and were not consistent with a fall down the stairs. Remember, she had at least 7, but possibly 10 deep lacerations to the top and back of her head. And for those watching the video version on YouTube and Spotify, I will show you illustrations of what these injuries look like because you need to see how strange they really are. It's like long lines across her head, and these were all scalp injuries. None of the injuries fractured her skull or caused any brain damage. Michael told the paramedics that arrived at his house the night that his wife died, that him and his wife had a really normal night before she fell down the stairs. They hung out a little bit, they had some wine, watched a movie, and then before the pair were to head to bed, Michael went outside to turn off the pool lights, and when he came back inside, he found his wife at the bottom of the stairs. And then Michael's story of events conveniently changed after Kathleen's autopsy was done, which found that Kathleen succumbed to her injuries 45 minutes to 2 hours after she sustained them, making Michael's story impossible. And then from then on, Michael would say that him and Kathleen watched a movie which ended around 11 p.m. They shared some wine together out by the pool and drank possibly 2 bottles each and were considerably intoxicated. So Michael would theorize that his intoxicated wife had fallen down the stairs and that's how she died. But her autopsy proved that Kathleen had a blood alcohol level of 0.07%, so drinking but not drunk. She would have been able to pass a breathalyzer test and still be able to legally drive. Kathleen's autopsy also found the prescription medication Valium in her system, which she was prescribed to, so it's possible that the mixture of drug and alcohol could have caused her to become disoriented and fall. When the police arrived, there were 2 wine glasses that were set out, possibly to stage the idea of a drunken fall, because neither glass had Kathleen's fingerprints or DNA on them. Michael's story of events continue. He says at an unknown time, but probably around midnight, Kathleen headed inside alone to do some work on his computer because she had left hers at the office and then she planned to go to bed afterwards. Michael claims that he stayed outside alone by the pool until around 2:30 a.m. before he headed inside and found Kathleen's body. And this is strange since it was December, it was cold, Michael was barefoot, only wearing a t-shirt and shorts at the time the paramedics arrived. And it's a really odd clothing choice for 52-degree Fahrenheit weather to be sitting alone that long out at night, barely wearing anything in the middle of winter. Michael never could explain why he chose to be outside for that long, and his movements from 12 to 2:30 a.m. are completely unknown. And to say that the first responding officers were really suspicious of Michael immediately would be a massive understatement. And they would conclude that Michael had killed his wife Kathleen and then spent a handful of hours cleaning up and staging the scene before he made those 911 calls to play the frantic husband role. The police did a luminol test on the Peterson home, and if you are unfamiliar with luminol, it is a test that will show where blood has been, even if someone attempts to try and clean it up. And the luminol showed that bloody footprints were tracked into the Petersons' kitchen, to the sink, and into the washing machine area before being cleaned up. Blood was also found on a pair of Michael's shoes, and a bloody shoe print belonging to Michael was found on Kathleen's pants, even though Michael was barefoot and claimed to be barefoot the entire evening. A small amount of blood was smeared on the doorway, which was heading outside, and small drops of blood were on the back walkway as well. The pool of blood that was surrounding Kathleen's body was completely dry, only further confirming that she was lying there for quite some time. A small amount of blood was also found on the inside of Michael's shorts that he was wearing when the paramedics and the police arrived. And how could you explain that? Well, I'll try. Michael Peterson killed his wife. He then tried to clean up the scene and stage it like an accidental fall. And then he tried to change into fresh, clean clothes. When he did so, he accidentally transferred a small amount of blood into the clothing that he was wearing. Kathleen's cause of death is believed to be blood loss, and the medical examiner determined that Kathleen's manner of death was a homicide, and her husband, Michael Peterson, was arrested for her murder less than 2 weeks later. And this was an arrest that shocked Michael, his children, his family, and the entire community. This was the perfect couple. There was no way that this was murder. And Michael had a lot of supporters, but that number would dwindle as the case unfolded. The murder trial of Michael Peterson began in July of 2003. The trial lasted a really, really long time, like 3 months, and it was the longest in the state's history. Michael got the best defense attorney that money could buy, and the defense strategy was that this was just a terrible, tragic accident. Kathleen mixed her prescription medicine with alcohol. She was disoriented. It was dark. She was tired. It was a narrow staircase. She was walking up the steps, tripped, fell backwards, hitting her head, possibly knocking herself unconscious, where she bled. Then she woke up. She was still disoriented. She tried to get up. She slipped on her own blood, falling and hitting her head again. And then again. And then again. Until she had those 7 head wounds and couldn't muster up the strength to get up once more, and she bled to death. And this theory, I guess, makes sense, like a little bit, maybe, but it still really, really seems super far-fetched. People that fall while walking up the steps usually fall forward, not backwards, and this theory doesn't explain why Michael changed his story to fit the autopsy, or why someone had attempted to clean blood up in the kitchen, or any of the other suspicious aspects to this case that we will go over later in this video. Kathleen's injuries were inconsistent with a fall down the stairs, but they were also inconsistent with blood force trauma, like being beaten by a blunt force object, which would be the prosecution's theory. I mean, when was the last time you ever heard of someone being beaten over the side of the head at least 7 times without causing a single skull fracture? Because remember, all of Kathleen's injuries were to her scalp. Also, I do feel the need to mention that the amount of blood at the scene was a lot for a simple fall down the stairs, but 10,000 blood splatters also seem like way too much for 7 head wounds. It's puzzling. The prosecution claimed that Michael killed his wife, and they had multiple motives on why they believed that to be true. But first, let's discuss the potential murder weapon, which to this day has never been found if it did exist. The prosecution believed that Michael killed his wife with a light, long, narrow rod, like a fireplace blowpoke, perhaps. And the Petersons did have a really, really nice blowpoke. And we know that to be true because it was actually a gift from Kathleen's sister, and it can be seen by the fireplace in dozens of family photos, but was conveniently or suspiciously missing from the Peterson home the day that Kathleen died, only to mysteriously reappear just in time for Michael's trial. Michael's son says that he actually found the blowpoke in his father's garage, and then he gave it to his father's lawyers so they could pull it out during Michael's trial to show that it could not possibly be the murder weapon, because it was covered in spider webs, trying to show that it had been sitting in the garage for quite some time. It didn't have any of Kathleen's blood or DNA on it, and it wasn't damaged or bent in any way like you would expect it to be if it was used in a brutal murder. But considering that the blowpoke wasn't immediately given to the police for proper forensic testing and just given to the lawyers so they could pull it out and do this whole show at the trial, I'm gonna do my best to be unbiased and just move on. When people lie, they often sprinkle in parts of the truth. And when Michael got on the stand to tell the jury what he did the night that his wife died, he mentions that his wife used his computer because she had left hers at the office. And this is something we actually know to be true, because a colleague actually forwarded an email to Michael's computer per Kathleen's request. And when Kathleen went on Michael's computer, it's possible that she could have learned that Michael was having an affair with a man, actually. You see, Michael Peterson is bisexual, and this is something that the state's attorneys really tried to make a scandal out of during his trial, and it really doesn't matter the gender. What matters is that Michael Peterson was hiding a secret from his wife, a secret that he possibly would kill to keep. On Michael Peterson's laptop were thousands of photos of men. He was also having conversations online with a 26-year-old male escort for months, with plans of meeting up in person shortly to pay for his services. Michael Peterson, under oath during his trial, admitted to sleeping with at least 6 men during his relationship to Kathleen, but he claimed that this was something she knew about. She knew about his bisexuality, and they took like a don't ask, don't tell aspect to this part of his life. And, you know, it's definitely possible that Kathleen was aware that her husband was bisexual, but that does not mean she would be okay with him sleeping with someone else. I mean, would you be okay with your husband sleeping with someone over 20 years younger than you, and that he was paying for it? Seriously doubt it. And if Kathleen did find out that her husband was being unfaithful, and let's say she blew up and was threatening to leave him, Michael Peterson would be ruined. And I'm not just talking about his reputation. He would be financially ruined. At the time of Kathleen's death, Michael and Kathleen were over $140,000 in debt. The company that Kathleen was working for were going under, and she believed that she was on the edge of losing her job. And Michael, who was once a really successful novelist, hadn't made an income in like over 2 years. Michael Peterson would be set to inherit over $1.8 million if Kathleen died, which adjusted for inflation would be like $3.2 million in today's money. If Kathleen found out that he was cheating and was blowing up and threatening to divorce him, it's possible that Michael felt that his wife, Kathleen, was worth more to him dead than as an ex-wife. But maybe that's just me speculating. And now we've gotten to possibly the strangest aspect in this entire case. Because what if I told you that Kathleen wasn't the only woman in Michael Peterson's life to be found dead at the bottom of her staircase? Before marrying Kathleen, Michael and his first wife, Patricia, lived in Germany after an injury left Michael discharged from his service in the Vietnam War. In Germany, Michael and Patricia were really, really close friends with another American couple named George and Elizabeth Ratliff. And in 1983, George sadly and suddenly passed away, leaving Elizabeth to raise their 2 daughters alone. But Michael, he really stepped up to be like a father figure in those girls' lives and really fill that like man of the house role for the entire family. And about 2 short years later, 16 years before Kathleen Peterson died, Elizabeth Ratliff and her 2 daughters would have dinner at the home of Patricia and Michael Peterson. After dinner, Michael offered to walk Elizabeth and her daughters home and help Elizabeth put her daughters to bed. Later that night, a neighbor of Elizabeth Ratliff claims that she saw Michael Peterson frantically running from Elizabeth's home. And the next morning, Elizabeth's nanny found Elizabeth lying dead at the bottom of her staircase. Blood everywhere, all over the stairs, the walls, all the way up to the ceiling. Elizabeth's cause of death was listed as an intracerebral hemorrhage, that she possibly had a stroke or a brain aneurysm while she was walking up her steps, which caused her to fall down them, and that she could have possibly even been dead before she reached the bottom of her staircase. She also had multiple lacerations to her head, which were nearly identical to the wounds to Kathleen Peterson. After Elizabeth's death, which orphaned her 2 children, Michael adopted Elizabeth's daughters. He then divorced his first wife, Patricia, took Elizabeth's daughters, moved back to the United States, leaving his first wife and his biological sons in Germany. And no one ever suspected Elizabeth's death to be a murder until the death of Kathleen Peterson, another woman to die the exact same way, that was also last seen alive by Michael Peterson. And this connection between the 2 women's deaths was actually not made, and possibly would have never been made if it wasn't for Elizabeth's sister, who reached out to the lead detective on Kathleen's murder to inform him that he should probably look into the possible connection that maybe Michael had done this before, and to her sister. Is it possible that Michael killed his wife Kathleen the same way that he killed Elizabeth Ratliff 16 years prior? I mean, he would have known how to do it, and he would have known how to gotten away with it. He could have thought that the connection would have never been made because Elizabeth died in another continent. Her death was never investigated as a homicide. Michael was never a suspect in Elizabeth's death, and the odd similarities between Kathleen and Elizabeth Ratliff only continue. Not only did they die the exact same way with similar injuries and were last seen by the exact same man, but the 2 women look eerily similar. It's an uncanny resemblance. The 2 could easily be sisters or even be mistaken as the other. And another super odd aspect to this case, another super odd similarity between the 2, is their possible shared art preferences. At the bottom of the staircase that Kathleen Peterson was found dead hung a unique art piece of a black cat. And I'm not kidding. The exact same art piece hung in Elizabeth Ratliff's home, and according to her friends and family, actually hung by the staircase that she was also found deceased at. It's getting so coincidental that it's almost seeming supernatural. Something out of the mind of Stephen King, a haunted piece of artwork that kills women on staircases. Or was Michael Peterson in love with Elizabeth Ratliff? Was he obsessed? Were the 2 of them having an affair? Could he have possibly been the one to actually buy Elizabeth Ratliff this cat art piece, and that he possibly wanted to replicate the same gift with a different woman? Did he marry Elizabeth's doppelganger on purpose? A woman that he only met and started dating a year after Elizabeth died? It's all getting too spooky. There's actually a lot of people that believe that Michael and Elizabeth were having an affair, and they actually believe that Michael fathered one of Elizabeth's children. And I'm not gonna lie, there is a striking resemblance to one of Elizabeth's daughters and Michael Peterson. So could this secret affair be a motive for murder, and why he chose to adopt Elizabeth's daughters in the first place? Reportedly, the theory that Michael Peterson was the father of one of Elizabeth's daughters has been debunked. But it's still odd, all the coincidences, isn't it? I mean, could Michael Peterson really just be the most unlucky man in history? Once the lead detectives and the prosecution were made aware of Elizabeth Ratliff's death, they exhumed her body to do a second autopsy, and her death was officially changed to a homicide. And Michael's defense really didn't have a leg to stand on anymore. And on October 10th, 2003, Michael Peterson was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his wife, Kathleen Peterson, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which devastated all of his children. Elizabeth's 2 daughters, his biological children, Elizabeth's daughters actually have continued to stand by Michael's side even to this day. The only child to turn against Michael was Kathleen's daughter, Caitlin. And in 2003, she actually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Michael, which was settled for $25 million. Michael failed to appeal his conviction multiple times and has continued to maintain his innocence in Kathleen and Elizabeth's deaths to this day. And then in 2011, Michael Peterson was awarded a new trial after an investigation that found one of the state's lead witnesses, a forensic specialist named Dwayne Deaver, was guilty of suppressing and repressing evidence to support whatever story the prosecution wanted to tell in over 30 cases, making Dwayne Deaver a fraud. He was fired, obviously, and every conviction that he was a part of had to be overturned and retried. But instead of going through an entirely new trial, Michael Peterson chose to take an Alford plea, which if you're not familiar with, because it is a very, very rare kind of plea deal, pretty much Michael Peterson is still maintaining his innocence while admitting that there was enough evidence for a jury to convict him. So in February of 2017, Michael Peterson pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was released on time served. So Michael Peterson is currently out of prison. He was released, and this is a very controversial plea deal, considering he possibly killed 2 women and was released after serving less than 8 entire years in prison and never even had to admit to being guilty. Now, before we wrap up this episode, I know you're probably all on the edge of your seat waiting for me to talk about this. It's possibly the strangest theory I've ever heard in a true crime case, and it's honestly so strange because of how bizarre it is and how it kind of makes a little bit of sense. And that is the theory that Kathleen Peterson was killed by an owl. Specifically a barred owl, which is a pretty common owl in Durham, North Carolina. Owls are also apparently very vicious creatures and known to attack humans and dive bomb their heads. I am the owl expert. I had never heard about this, but I found a lot of cases of owls attacking humans, surprisingly. And when Kathleen Peterson was found dead, clenched in her hand was a clump of her own hair that had been ripped out from the root. And in the clump of hair were also pine needles and microscopic owl feathers. The injuries on Kathleen's scalp also look very similar to owl talons that I found in just Google searches. And it would make a lot of sense. Owl talons could definitely cause significant damage to someone's scalp, cause them to bleed a lot without actually fracturing their scalp, like in the injuries that we see on Kathleen Peterson. So the theory is when Kathleen was heading inside to work on her husband's computer, a owl dive bombed her and began to attack her head. So she begins to run to her home for safety while she's ripping at her head to try and get this owl out of her hair, which would explain the clumps of her own hair in her hands, the pine needles, and the owl feathers that were found clenched into her palm. This theory could also explain those mysterious drops of blood that were found outside the Petersons' home and also that smear of blood on the door. Could the panicked and disoriented Kathleen have fallen down the stairs on a frantic route to safety? I feel this theory makes a lot of sense, honestly, and the more you dive deep into it, the more things piece together. But wouldn't you expect more evidence of an owl attack, possibly more feathers outside? Could more feathers have been outside but were just overlooked by detectives? Unfortunately, this theory does not explain why blood appeared to have been cleaned up in the kitchen, why Michael lied about what he did the night that his wife died, and why another woman in his life had died the exact same way. Also, I believe it's important to tell you that I only found one reported owl death in human history ever. There's only been one reported owl death. So do with that what you will. I personally believe that Michael Peterson is guilty as sin. But what do I know? Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. A popular Netflix docuseries on this case called The Staircase was released in 2018, and it was meant to be like an unbiased look on this case. But personally, I believe that it's very biased towards Michael to make him look like really good. He appears to be like really charming, and he's like likable in the docuseries. And I think that it's biased towards him for multiple reasons. One of them is that Michael himself played a heavy hand in the production of the docuseries, and also reportedly Michael was dating one of the editors for the docuseries while he was in prison, and even lived with her after he was released from prison. Michael also wrote a memoir called Beyond the Staircase and appears to live mostly out of the public eye today, and he is currently 81 years old. After Elizabeth Ratliff's cause of death was changed to a homicide, her case was reopened and reinvestigated, but that was several years ago, and sadly, I could not find any other public update. Michael Peterson has never been charged with Elizabeth Ratliff's murder, and he has never been a public person of interest or a suspect in her death. During Michael Peterson's murder trial, for the murder of his wife, Kathleen Peterson, the state could not find a single witness that could testify that Michael and Kathleen Peterson were anything less than a happy couple that was deeply in love. So what are your thoughts? Tragic accident, cold-blooded murder, or victim of bird of prey? Whatever theory you lean towards, I'm sure we can all agree that this is one of the most puzzling, confusing cases, and we will likely never know exactly what happened. I hope that you learned something today, and thank you so much for spending a little bit of your day with me. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know all your thoughts and theories in the comments below. And if you're listening anywhere else, it would mean the world to me if you could take a little bit of time to rate and review the show. I hope you guys all have a happy and safe new year. You guys were truly one of the biggest blessings of my 2024. And I will see you guys next year when we are hot on the case once again.